Mr. President, it was 150 years ago today. 150 years ago today when the last, what is called the last casualty of the Civil War died. He was a man who was born in your home state of Kentucky, grew up for a part of his life in Indiana, but spent his formative years in my state of Illinois. He was a country lawyer, an unlikely congressman who, because of a political deal, was given a chance to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. He served only 2 years, brought his family here to Washington for that experience. They lived just across the street in a boarding house where the Library of Congress now sits. His family didn't like Washington in those days in the 1840s and returned back to his wife's home in Kentucky. He stayed out here and served in Congress and liked it, wanted to serve for a longer period of time, but was reminded that that wasn't part of the agreement, only 2 years. So he left Washington, went back to Springfield, Illinois, practiced law, but continued to aspire to higher office. In 1858, ran for the United States Senate against a man named Stephen Douglas. They had historic debates across the state of Illinois. When the votes were finally counted, Douglas was the victor. This man returned to the practice of law. Just 2 years later, though, he was elected president of the United States. He came to Washington at one of the most dangerous times in our history. A civil war had started, and there was a question as to whether the Union could survive, whether the United States of America would survive. And this simple country lawyer from what was considered the frontier of America in those days led our nation during the most dangerous moments in our history. He watched as more Americans died in that Civil War than in any war that we have ever witnessed. And he saw a nation bitterly divided. The war raged on for years. There were moments, bleak and dark moments, when it looked as if the North would fail and the division of the country would begin. But eventually, the North prevailed, and this leader took credit for a victory that really the American people had given so much to achieve. In April of 1865, it was a tumultuous period. I commend to all of my colleagues a book written by Jay Winnick, a Senate staffer, entitled April 1865. If you want to get a feel for what it was like in America that month. Many things occurred. The second inaugural address of this president, one of the most beautiful, touching, and moving speeches ever given by a president, where he turned toward the enemy that had fought the North for so many years and basically extended an olive branch when many others would have done just the opposite, with malice toward none, with charity for all. He gave that speech right outside here, right outside the Senate chamber on the porch. And then, in celebration of the victory of the Union, he and his wife attended a play not far from here at Ford's Theater. And it was there that an assassin took his life. 150 years ago today, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, was assassinated. We've learned a lot from his life, from his leadership, and we enjoy the blessings of liberty and a union today because that president and the men and women who stood by him saved the Union. I reflect on this because I come from what's known as Mr. Lincoln's hometown of Springfield, Illinois. I'm not an expert on Lincoln. I'm just a fan, as so many people are, not only across the United States, but around the world. I hope we can remember him just for a moment today and reflect on the need for all of us to extend an olive branch to our personal enemies and our political enemies and try to find how to eliminate an enemy by making a friend, as Lincoln said.